If you're eager to find out who's going to win the presidential election shortly after the polls close on November 5th, well, get ready to wait. The race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is so tight, and the closeness of this race magnifies some of the reasons it takes a while to count the votes in the first place. Here are 3 factors that could leave us waiting on election night. First, there's the mail-in vote. A lot of voters like the convenience of being able to vote by mail. Mail ballots take longer to count, signatures have to be verified, identities have to be verified. Back in 2020, Trump cast doubt on that election by noting the prevalence of mail ballots.
I've been talking about mail-in voting for a long time. It's a corrupt system. They want to find out how many the votes they need, and then they seem to be able to find them.
In a lot of states, they count the mail ballots last. In Pennsylvania, for example, on election night, Donald Trump had a pretty big lead because all the votes that were tabulated were the votes that were cast on election day, and Republican voters were more likely to vote on election day.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Well, there are almost 2 million mail-in absentee ballots that have not been counted yet in the state of Pennsylvania.
Only after those mail ballots were tallied, Joe Biden overtook Trump and was declared president-elect. Now, the good news is they changed the law, but not by that much. In Pennsylvania, election officials can now begin counting those mail ballots on the morning of election day, which will give them a little bit of a head start, but not one that's likely to significantly change how long it takes to count all those ballots. Second, there might be other irregularities or hangups in the vote count. Since 2020, a number of counties across the country have instituted mandatory hand counting of ballots. Quite obviously a time-consuming process, so time-consuming, officials in some states are worried that those counties, which are primarily red counties, might miss some of the deadlines about reporting their vote counts to state officials. There's also existing litigation across the states around overseas voters in Michigan, or undated mail ballots in Pennsylvania, or some of the new election rules in Georgia that could lead to some votes potentially being set aside while these cases work their way through the courts, and the courts decide ultimately if those votes should be counted. Third, there's the possibility of recounts. In some states, the recount is automatic if the 2 candidates are within a certain distance of each other. In some states, any losing candidate can request a recount as long as they pay for it. Everybody remembers the 2000 Florida recount, and the recount was never completed. Courts could never decide which votes should be counted and which shouldn't. In that state, there were questions about the voter's intent and marks on the ballot. We've had recounts even more recently than that.
With the margin being so close, it will require a full by-hand recount.
In Georgia 4 years ago, with Joe Biden's very narrow victory over Donald Trump in that state. The presidential election didn't come down to Georgia in 2020, but imagine for a second if it did. Given how close this presidential race is, it's not hard to imagine a recount or recounts in a couple of states being determinative about which candidate's going to get the 270 electoral votes needed to become the next president. Now, I know it's frustrating not to find out the winner on election night.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win.
4 years ago, Donald Trump used that tabulation time to cast doubt on the results and spread conspiracy theories about the election. But ultimately, that's just how long it took to count the ballots. And at the end of the day, the decision on who's going to be the president-elect is not up to Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or even the news media. It's the voters. And we have to sometimes wait for every vote to be counted.